When you hear the word addictions, what do you think of? Drugs, alcohol, cigarettes? Do you think of adults who have too much to drink at parties, or do you think of people my age or younger? Well, the people my age might not be drinking, taking the drugs, or smoking the cigarettes, but that doesn't mean we aren't affected. When you see those adults at bars or parties, or at home after a long day at work, what you don't normally think of is their children. And what happens to those children behind closed doors? And what happens to the children when they grow up to be adults who are neglected or abused as kids? In fact, children with parents with addictions are 50% more likely to obtain an addiction in adulthood, and some are even born with addictions to dangerous drugs like heroin or crack cocaine. These, along with many other effects, are not good for the youth of America, and we need to stop this cycle for the sake of our society. My name is Abigail Wenner, and I am here to tell you how addictions affect the non-addicted and can do the worst to people who are too young to choose. Well, there are many ways these children are affected. The most harmful one is that they're often abused or neglected by their parents, and they allow other people to abuse their children as well. Because of this neglect, children grow up to not respect authority and can often become uncontrollable kids, not because they're a bad kid, but because of the effect their corrupt parent has on them. Another major thing that affects a child is that they may not have learned to properly groom themselves and have not learned basic skills such as brushing their teeth properly. They also do not know table manners and may have trouble making or keeping friends because of their instinct not to rely on people. In these households, the oldest child in the family often has to learn how to take care of themselves, their younger siblings, or even their own parents. They also learn to hoard food when it's available because there's often not enough because the parents often neglect buying food for their children. As well as the way they're affected, there's also something called a disposition, which is something the child has to deal with. What it does is it makes the child more likely to have an addiction when they grow up. The strongest cause of this is crack cocaine. This drug is so strong that babies born from crack addicts are literally born addicted to cocaine and are known as crack babies, who need detox directly from the womb. In addition to the baby being born with this addiction, crack is also the only drug, or really only thing, that can break a maternal bond. A maternal bond is the extremely strong bond between a mother and a child, and when this bond is broken, the parents can stop caring about their child altogether. For example, for 20 years, my father, who is a lawyer in Washington, D.C., worked at a homeless mission as a mentor, working with a psychiatrist to try and help people, and worked with many addicts who became homeless because things got so bad. One thing the mission had to do was have a bus that went around the city picking up young children, usually 5 to 6 years old, that were wandering the streets of Washington, D.C. because their parents, who were drug dealers or crack addicts, would just leave the children there to fend for themselves. Also, children with parents with addictions can be also broken down by neglect of their parents and become addicts themselves. Within the 20 years my dad worked there, he also met this man who he helped get over his drug addiction, who had a son that was always visiting his father. Well, the father did eventually get better, but just last year, that same boy, over 10 years later, came up to my father telling him that he remembered seeing him at the mission and told him that they had become an addict themselves. These things I've said and these stories I've told are all part of what kids with addicts as parents go through on a daily basis, and they clearly are affected by their parents. In conclusion, children with addicts as parents grow up with things and go along with lifestyles that seem crazy to the average person, and often when people see an addict, they think it's completely their fault. As it very well could be, there is also a possibility they could have grown up with a disposition or even born an addict. This cycle can continue for generation after generation if we don't make efforts to stop it. Ways this cycle can be stopped is if we stop focusing on just the addict themselves, but also the rest of the family, as rehab is needed for the entire family to effectively stop an addiction. If children of addicts are kept away from obtaining an addiction, the amount of people with an addiction in our society would greatly decrease, bettering our society's future. Thank you.